I was having lunch with an artist friend in Chutzot HaYotzer. Some of you have probably been there. It's the artist colony near the old city. And we were having lunch in her studio. So being near the old city, I thought of the period of time that we are in, which is the 3 weeks before Tisha B'Av. And here I am near the location where the Romans so long ago destroyed the temple in 70. Jerusalem was devastated and many went into exile. A key personality throughout this history is Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Mm-hmm. We're going to look at him a bit and his personality before we take a look at his teachings in Pirkei Avot. So, when Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai fell ill, his disciples came to visit him. When he saw them, he began to weep. His disciples said to him, "Light of Israel, right-hand pillar, mighty hammer, why do you weep?" He said to them, "Were I being led before a mortal king, I would weep. Now that I am being led before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be he, and moreover, 2 paths are before me, one to Gan Eden, paradise, and the other to Gehinnom, hell, and I do not know upon which I am to be led. Shall I not weep?" Now, what would you assume about a person who seems to be of the opinion that there is a good chance that he's going to Gehenna? What kind of a person would that be? Although probably the most rotten of people would not even think about the fact that maybe he's going there. But what would you assume about a person who is thinking about that, considering that that is a real possibility?
He was guilty of something. He would feel guilty about what he's done in his life.
Okay, good.
Or he's he's full of humility, that no matter how good he may have been, he has a lot of humility, so he worries.
Okay, you're both right. Very humble, and we'll see that as we look at his relationship with his students. But Bev is also right in that he was feeling guilty about something. And what that is, we're going to see very quickly. Let's continue seeing what the sages said about him. The sages said about Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, the teacher of Rabbi Eliezer, in all his days, he never engaged in idle conversation, and he never walked 4 cubits without engaging in Torah study and without donning tefillin. I said tefillin because probably most people know what tefillin are and not phylacteries. That doesn't help much to people who don't know. And no person ever preceded him into the study hall. And he never slept in the study hall. He was always alert, neither substantial sleep nor a brief nap. And he never contemplated matters of Torah in alleyways, filthy with human excrement, as doing so is a display of contempt for the Torah. And he never left anyone in the study hall and exited. No person ever found him sitting and silent. In other words, inactive. Rather, he was always sitting and studying. And only he opened the door for his students, disregarding his own eminent standing. And he never said anything that he did not hear from his teacher. And he never said to his students that the time has arrived to arise and leave the study hall, except on Passover Eves, when you really had to get ready. When they were obligated to sacrifice the Paschal lamb, and Yom Kippur Eves, when there is a mitzvah to eat and drink abundantly. And Rabbi Eliezer, his student, accustomed himself to model his conduct after his example in Rabbi Yochanan, his teacher. So what do we glean further about Rabbi Yochanan from this? As Tzipora said, he didn't hesitate because he was humble to be the one who would open the door rather than have somebody else do that for him. Now, why would a teacher do that?
He's actually giving honor to his students instead of the other way. I mean,
Okay.
that's a beautiful thing.
Anyone else?
He's always welcoming them.
Yafeh. What else do we know about him besides welcoming them?
He's always studying. He's totally in depth with all the studies. He never stops.
And he
He's
doesn't.
humble. He's humble. He's
Yes.
humble.
Yeah.
He's also setting an example for those around him.
Okay. So he's not just sitting and studying, but in his studying and in his excitement for that and in his encouraging the students to sit and study, that is an example. And for more than this Rabbi Eliezer. By the way, Rabbi Yochanan was a student of both Rabbi Hillel and Shammai. Now, what was the scene? What was going on during this period of time of Rabban Yochanan being considered the leader of the community, as I say, in the time where the Romans were very close to completely destroying the temple? He found himself in a very, very difficult situation. Life was devastating, Jewishly, spiritually, like the Maccabees a couple of hundred years before. The Romans also came up with decrees not allowing for study, Shabbat, Brit Milah, Kashrut, Rosh Chodesh, 5 key elements in our life cycle. And the Romans did the same thing. And in addition, they were taxing the Jews so much that poverty was rampant. So a decision has to be made. What do you do with the members of this Roman Empire who are controlling you and hurting you? What are the options? Imagine that you're in that situation. What are the options?
you can either sit back and let it happen, or you can rebel against it.
Okay, all right. And in fact, that's what he found himself in. And he had to choose. Was he going to side with what we might call the proud nationalists, the zealots who were not willing to sit back, but literally wanted to use whatever military strength they had to fight this massive, powerful Roman Empire? Or are you going to be pragmatic? Now, what does pragmatic mean here? Yochanan thought to himself, there is no way that we will stand up militarily to the Romans. No way. And if an attempt is made, it's going to end in disaster. So rather than that, he thought of something that's considered pragmatic and showed that he wasn't willing to take a chance on being wiped out just to stand up to the Romans, but wanted to be sure that even if it was going to be in a different state, and I mean that metaphorically and literally, and in a different place, we have to survive. And this next text describes what went on. The Biryonim, a group of zealots, were then in the city. The rabbis said to them, "Let us go out and make peace with them, the Romans." They would not let them, but on the contrary said, "Let us go out and fight them." The rabbi said, "You will not succeed." They, the Biryonim, then rose up and burnt the stores of wheat and barley so that a famine ensued and the Jews would be forced to fight. Try to picture this vividly. Abba Sikra, the leader of these Biryonim of Yerushalayim, was the nephew of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabban Yochanan sent to him saying, "Come privately to me." When he came, Rabban Yochanan said to him, "How long will you continue this and kill everyone with starvation?" He, Abba Sikra, said to him, "What can I do? Even if I agree with you, if I say anything to them, to the Biryonim, they will kill me." Yochanan says to his nephew, "Devise some way for me to escape the besieged city of Yerushalayim. Perhaps I shall be able to save a small portion." Rabban Yochanan then escaped and met with the Roman general Vespasian. What they did is, Abba Sikra came up with this plan that a rumor would be started that Yochanan was ill, deathly ill, and then that he's died, and two of his students were going to carry him outside the gates of the city because they didn't want to bury him within Jerusalem. And they thought they could get away with that. And indeed, they did. As soon as he's on the other side, he goes to meet the Roman general. Vespasian said to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, let me just say one more thing. Vespasian, as I said, was the military commander. And when, another version of this narrative, when Rabban Yochanan meets him, he calls him king. And in the fuller Talmudic text, Vespasian says to him, why are you calling me king? You should be killed for that. That's not respectful. There's another king. Who was it? Or emperor, Nero. But just as he says that, Vespasian gets word that Nero has died. And Vespasian has to go. So he is very impressed with Rabban Yochanan for having seen that that was about to happen. So he says to him, I am going now, and someone else will come in my place. But you may make a request of me, and I shall grant it. Rabban Yochanan says three things. He makes three requests. Give me Yavne and its scholars, a small place outside of Jerusalem. Secondly, the dynasty of Rabban Gamliel. I want the presidents that are part of that dynasty to be able to continue. And I want doctors to heal Rabbi Tzadok. Now, who is this Rabbi Tzadok? Apparently, someone who was praying for years and years and years for the problem with Rome to end. But not only was he praying, he was fasting. And so he became very ill. Now, a couple of questions. What do you think of Rabban Yochanan's decision? And why do you think he didn't bother asking for us to be able to save Jerusalem? Okay, so somebody please. Your thoughts about Yochanan's action and leaving Yerushalayim and speaking with Vespasian. And then why did he not even, he was asked, you can make a request of me. Why did he not try for maintaining Yerushalayim? Anyone?
I think his nephew, it's Michael,
Yes.
his nephew made it very clear that even though he was in this party of zealots, he said, if I, try to make peace, they'd kill me. So I think he realized that with the zealots there, it would be a loss. Like there's no way they'd be able to, even if Rome said, okay, you can keep Jerusalem, they would kill each other. They fight among themselves. So he probably realized the only way to save Judaism is to have a place to study. So he asked for this little place, Yavne, with his scholars. And that
Absolutely.
would be one little place.
Yeah, very good. They say about the destruction of the Second Temple, and this is what we're talking about, that unlike the First Temple that we're told was caused because of idolatry and adultery and murder, what's the reason that's given for the destruction of the Second Temple?
Causeless hatred.
Yafeh. Sinat chinam. And you read this description here, and it is so ugly of violence being threatened against fellow Jews. Now, again, Michael is correct in that Yochanan, it's not that he didn't love Yerushalayim, but two things. Even if he was being granted a wish, he did not think that Rome would allow that, because it was clear that they wanted to destroy and were intent on destroying Jerusalem. But more than that, he felt he wanted to get away from Jerusalem, where there was such hatred and violence. And maybe in Little Yavne, it would be a better atmosphere for Limud Torah studying. Anyone else? Or did Michael say it all? Anybody disagree with what Yochanan did?
I think he was very practical.
Yeah. Very practical.
But Bracha, if I go back to the first part where you read about him on his deathbed and wondering whether he was going to have to paradise or he's going to hell, after this series of events, it's no wonder he was wondering, did I make the right decision or didn't I make the right decision?
You just said what my next paragraph was going to be. Indeed, when Bev at the very beginning said that he must have felt guilty about something, he wasn't 100% sure, but as a leader, he acted and was very rational and practical. But maybe I was too hasty in giving up on Yerushalayim, or not doing all we could to save the temple, the Beit HaMikdash. And this is what his fear was. His fear was. But like many leaders, he didn't allow that to stop him and went with his instinct, but a thought out instinct.
Why don't you, it looks like it's going to rain a bit later, but it's.
Okay, please. Now, this is an incredibly difficult situation. Let's read a little more from Avot to Rabbi Natan. The story is told that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Joshua, one of his other students, were walking by the ruins of the temple, near where I was today. Rabbi Joshua said, "Woe to us that the place where the atonement for the sins of Israel was made has been destroyed." But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai replied, "Do not be grieved, my son. Do you not know that we have a means of making atonement that is as good as this, i.e. the sacrifices in the temple? And what is it? Gmilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness. As it is said, for I desire chesed, loving kindness, and not sacrifice," from the Navi, the prophet Hosea. And this theme is repeated so often in the prophets of God making it clear, you can give me these sacrifices in the temple 3 times a day, but if you don't know how to treat each other, then it's worth nothing. It's worth nothing. Now, this, and perhaps it's difficult for us to imagine being people that never had the Beit HaMikdash, but so much of their lives was centered, and not just for sacrifices, around that building that they are now torn, and so was Rabban Yochanan, and that's why he was feeling perhaps a little guilty. But in this generation, after the Churban, the destruction of the temple, they are seized by a longing on the one hand for the temple versus forging a way to survive without this temple. For many, it was unimaginable. What are we going to do now? What are we going to do now? So what happens when Rabban Yochanan makes the request for Yavne, and he doesn't just say a place, but he says, and scholars, what he is doing in that moment is giving his vision that Judaism can survive without the temple. The building is not important, but study and Torah, those are what's eternal. But this was such a different mindset from what so many were accustomed to. There's no doubt about it. So the zealots, you know, if you hadn't heard the description of them being violent and you just heard how they're going to fight the Roman Empire, my guess is we wouldn't feel a certain negativity that we do when we hear of how they're related. Not in the battlefield, but in their own city with fellow Jerusalemites. Because look this week in the Parsha when you're studying Pinchas, that there is something positive also about being a zealot. But you can do that on your own. Now, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, did he succeed with his plan? Yehuda, I see your mouth moving, but I'm not hearing. You have to unmute yourself. Yehuda?
Unmute. Okay.
Yes,
You
Yes.
got to say more if we took that time to unmute you.
Okay. Say
Why
more.
did he succeed? How do we know he succeeded?
How do you know he succeeded? Answer.
because he left Jerusalem and started again.
Absolutely. And because of that move, Judaism has survived. In Israel, I'm going to be mean, for the time being outside of Israel. But it was an essential move. Okay, now let's look at some Mishnayot from Pirkei Avot with our Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabban Yochanan, the son of Zakkai, received the tradition from Hillel and Shammai. Now note, what's important about that? Saying from Hillel and Shammai.
Well, he's hearing two sides of any debate that they had.
Yafeh, okay? It's not just one of them, but both.
He's also putting one of them in advance of the other.
Ooh,
First.
so does that mean that He sees Hillel as being more important, Abe, than Shammai?
I would say so.
There are two ways of looking at it. Sometimes you lead up to the more important.
Doesn't
Just
read
like when
that
I
way.
began today, I said Bet Tikva Choir, Chazan Avram Feder, and then I said Srill Glick. I had to, play with that for a moment. But there are two ways of looking at that. Now, if he said Hillel first, perhaps you'll remember what I said, if not last week, another time, that Hillel is the one that we usually follow. And part of that is because of the respect he gave even someone who disagreed with him. And he would always mention Shammai before he said what he thought. Okay. Good for
Bracha.
noticing that. Go ahead.
Can I just add that I think it's amazing because I would have thought that the loyalty to each group was really very partitioned. And the fact that this man was willing to listen to both of them speaks volumes.
Wonderful, Helen. Yeah. And you should know personally that they even had marriages between them. Okay, another time. He would say, Yochanan, if you have learned much Torah, do not take credit for yourself. It is for this that you have been formed. So what's he implying here? That you could have people who would say, I've learned so much. Now, you can say that in two ways. You can say it, this is what I live for, learning. And you say, I've learned so much because maybe you're even trying to convince somebody else to come learn. But he says, even if you're doing it day and night, don't pat yourself on the shoulder. That's the reason that you were born for. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this notion of God choosing us, not because we're more special, but hoping that we would fulfill a mission. Now, this Mishnah should not surprise us because Rabbi Yochanan risked his life for this mission. He could have easily been discovered. And in fact, we're told in that same section of the Talmud that I was telling you about, that the guards, and we believe that the guards at the gates of the city could have been Jews, that were told that one of them wanted to hit him to make sure he was covered, that he was really dead. And they said, how could you do that? People will see how you're treating a dead body. But he risked his life. So obviously, Torah is front and center in his life. Okay. Now, we go on. This is from chapter 2 of Pirkei Avot. Rabban Yochanan, the son of Zakkai, had 5 disciples. Now, I've just described a great man. So why does it say here he had 5 disciples? That's all? Now let me read on a little, and maybe if you, with a couple of things that have been said, will come up with why it says 5. Who are they? Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Hyrcanus, Rabbi Joshua, the son of Hananiah, Rabbi Yosei the Kohen, Rabbi Shimon, the son of Netanel, and Rabbi Elazar, the son of Arach. And he, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, would recount their praises. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Hyrcanus, is a cemented cistern that loses not a drop. Rabbi Joshua, the son of Hananiah, fortunate is she who gave birth to him. Rabbi Yosei, the Cohen, a chassid, pious. Rabbi Shimon, the son of Netanel, fears sin. And Rabbi Elazar ben Arach is an ever-increasing wellspring, a mayan. So he's listed here 5 attributes, one for each of the students that he praises them for. He had many, many more students than 5. Most of the commentators on this Mishnah say Rabban Yochanan, who we've already agreed appears to be humble. But humble doesn't mean you sit back, as he was never inactive, as we can see. But he had a concern that these 5 students would possibly be so humble that they would not realize their strengths. And he believed that when one has a strength and doesn't put it to use, that's also a sin. Think about it. And so he wanted to be sure that he was giving them a message. You have a strength, go with it. Go with it. Now, let's look at each of these traits. So, Eliezer ben, well, let me do it this way. Anybody want to rate these traits? We have someone who's a cemented cistern. Now, keep in mind, what that means is he has an amazing memory, but it's not like a watertight tank, which eventually loses its taste. Rather, a cistern is a pit in the ground which preserves natural sweetness of the water. And so Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is a cemented cistern. Now, one of the commentators asks, well, why should somebody be praised for having an amazing memory? Isn't that something that you're born with? Well, he answers and he says, it's not because he has a photographic memory. No, it was because, like Yochanan, and we saw this is the Rabbi Eliezer that was referred to earlier, like Rabban Yochanan, Eliezer sat and studied and restudied and restudied. And that's why he remembered. So we have somebody who remembers and preserves. The next, Rabbi Yeshua, the son of Hananiah. Fortunate is she who gave birth to him. That's a rather odd way of putting it. So what might that say about Yeshua if we're saying she was a lucky woman, his mother?
He was a good son.
Yes, he was a good son. He was a good guy. Yefeh. Okay. Next, who do we have? We have Rabbi Yossi the Cohen, a chassid, a pious one. And remember, so very often people hear chassid, they picture people dancing around. No, this is talking about from the same shoresh as chesed, kindness. There's an inner religiosity, and he has kindness both to God and to a fellow human being. And then we have Rabbi Shimon, the son of Netanel, and he says about him, he fears sin. Now, don't they all fear sin if they're Talmidei Chachamim, students? So here we're told that he so feared sin that he stayed away from any potential routes to sin. Now, we might say get a life, but so what he was fulfilling in it from another Mishnah earlier in Pirkei Avot is asu siyag l'Torah, make a fence around the Torah. Do you know why you make a fence around the Torah? By the way, so you'll have a safer Torah. Ha ha ha. Nobody got that? Okay. Safer and safer. Okay.
I got it.
Okay. Asu siyag. So what it means when you make a fence around the Torah, just like we have traffic lights and you have a red light, but you don't go from the green to the red. Here it's actually the opposite. But you have the yellow. And the yellow, you're meant to already stop with that yellow. So it's like you're going to stop at the yellow to make sure that you don't go through the red. So we have certain laws. The first that comes to my mind is the concept of muktzah. You could touch money on Shabbat, but they made a law because they don't want you to use money on Shabbat and go to a store, so that touching the money is muktzah. You don't touch it because then you might use it, etc., etc. So this is what Shimon was like, that he just made sure he wasn't in any tempting situations where he would sin. The last student, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, is an ever-increasing wellspring. He was a spring that flows over and over with renewed vigor. And the older he became, apparently he became that much more prolific. Now, unlike Eliezer the first, who preserved and remembered, Elazar had a creative mind. And he didn't just preserve, but he looked at a certain situation and a moment and said, we have to go with that moment, like Rabban Yochanan. Okay, so I want to ask you now, do you have a preference or think that one of these qualities is more important than the other? And let's keep it in the context of this time with the destruction and the Romans
You
and
know
the
what?
move to Yavne. Yes?
Bracha, I'm having difficulty, even though each one has an attribute
Mhm.
that stands out. I can't believe that each of the others doesn't have a touch or a tad or more of all of those, and that all of them could have a bit of everything that's been offered.
And usually that's the case. But this is, you know, if you had to go around now and all the people that are in this Zoom, and you had to say one quality for each of them, I'm sure something, should we do that? No. Okay. That something would stand out for each person. It's an interesting exercise. So it doesn't mean, absolutely, it doesn't mean, now we're going to get to that. It doesn't mean that they don't have some of the other. No. But this is what, okay, but does anybody else want to say?
I
Yeah.
would, oh, go ahead.
Okay, it's Michael. The last one you mentioned with the creativity, you're in a place now where we've never been before. The temple is destroyed and Judaism has to be totally refurbished, so to speak. So I think having the creativity of this last rabbi is probably the most important characteristic for the people living at that time, because he may see things in ways that we can continue Judaism that the others can't, because they're based on the past, on their past actions, on their memories, on those kinds of things.
Okay. Anybody want to respond to what Michael just said? And what he said, I agree with. On the other hand, precisely because the question of survival is there, is it not perhaps possible that you need some of the first Eliezer because you want to preserve from the past as well? Being creative, even if they're in a new place, literally and metaphorically, that doesn't mean, as months ago we discussed with Micha Goodman, that doesn't mean throwing out the past. You just have to know how to incorporate that and maintain in new ways. Okay, and this is the debate that goes on between many commentators, that it isn't an all or nothing, that yes, you need Elazar ben Aruch. You need all of them. You need all of them. You need all of them. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Now, Rabban, look at how Rabban Yochanan, what he says, used to say, if all the sages were to be in one cup of a balance scale, and Eliezer, the son of Hyrcanus, were in the other, he would outweigh them all. Okay, the first one who preserves. Abba Shaul said in Rabban Yochanan's name, if all the sages of Israel were to be in one cup of a balance scale, Eliezer, the son of Hyrcanus included, the one who's just been praised, and Elazar, the son of Arach, were in the other, he would outweigh them all. So you have here, almost it seems like a contradiction, but it's not. It's what I just said, you know, that he can think this and he can think that. And maybe that's why he was having such a rough time on his deathbed. Okay, now, certainly Ramban Yochanan ben Zakkai reflects this saying that I'm sure we're all familiar with from the Talmud. I learned much from my teachers, more from my associates, but from my students, most of all. Now, I'm sure you recall from last week that we said everyone can be our teacher, yes? And we are all meant to be students eternally. It was clear that Rabban Yochanan had such caring for his students, and it was mutual, we're told. Okay, now, Ramban Yochanan ben Zakkai has a plan. He doesn't want his students to only sit and study. And we begin. Rabbi Yochanan said to these five, go out and see which is the best trait for a person to acquire. Now, interesting. Here it doesn't, this version doesn't say go out, but in many it does. Go out. Why is he sending them out? Or what does that go out really mean? Go out and see which is the best trait for a person to acquire. I'm thinking of two possibilities. It can be seen in two different ways.
I think he wants them to go out into the world and really see what the world is like. They can't learn what they have to learn sitting in the study hall all the time. They have to be part of the real world.
Okay, Marlene, that's one definite way of looking at it. Anything else? Very different. Suggested that he's saying, go out of yourselves. Now, rather than picture them, because they're sitting in the Beit Midrash as always holy, he realizes, and they should realize, that they have natural desires. And he's saying, I want you to put those aside. Get out of yourselves. Don't let that influence you when you're out there in the world in trying to find what is the best trait for a person to have. And before somebody asks, of course, they're going to come back and each of them is going to say a different trait. That doesn't mean that they don't believe that another one might be important as well. Okay, so go and see which is the best trait for a person to acquire. Said Rabbi Eliezer, a good eye. What's a good eye? What does that mean?
To see
What
the
do you think that
positive in other people.
I'm sorry?
To see the positive in other people.
Yefeh. Okay, that you look at somebody else, you see the positive, or putting it a different way, you're open to them, you're not envious of them. Okay, that's ayin tova. Okay, then Joshua comes back and says, a good friend. What's a good friend? And what is missing there? He says a good trait is a good friend. There are two ways you can read that. Either
To be one or to have
yeah,
one.
good, Rhoda. Yeah, absolutely. And we can have different views on what it means to be a good friend. You know, does a good friend just let their friend do things that might not be wonderful? Or when do you get involved? Are you willing to take the chance that maybe they'll be upset with you for a day, for a week, for a year? Okay, but this is what he says. Rabbi Yossi says, a good neighbor. Now, we talked last week when we talked about staying away from a bad friend or a bad neighbor. So a good neighbor here is also referring to the kind of neighborhood that you're living in, and make sure that it's not a neighbor who erects what's called a spite fence, but somebody who's looking to be part of a good community. Rabbi Shimon, to see what is born out of one's actions, meaning you look to the future and you think about, well, if I do this, what might be the consequences? And Rabbi Elazar says, a good heart. Now, what do you think? You probably have read already the next part. Said he to them, Rabban Yochanan, I prefer the words of Elazar, the son of Arach, to yours, for his words include all of yours. You agree? Having a good heart means that you're going to have all the other traits. Yes?
Yeah,
People?
that makes sense.
Okay. All right. And think of the heart also in the sense that it, perhaps even more than the intellect and the mind, is the decision-making organ within us, because you do what your heart tells you to do. Okay, then he goes to them, he says to them, go and see which is the worst trait, the one that a person should most distance himself from. Said Rabbi Eliezer, an evil eye. Okay, the opposite. Said Rabbi Yoshua, an evil friend. Said Rabbi Yossi, an evil neighbor. Said Rabbi Shimon, to borrow and not to repay. For one who borrows from man is as one who borrows from the Almighty, as it is stated, the wicked man borrows and does not repay, but the righteous one is benevolent and gives. You can see I'm reading that quickly. Interesting, if you look at said Rabbi Elazar, he says an evil heart. So all of them, except for Rabbi Shimon, says the opposite of what they had said regarding the positive trait. So what is the significance of him saying to borrow and not to repay? How does that relate to the positive that he said, be aware of the future and the consequences of your actions? How is it, yes, relating to the positive? What can you say about a wicked man who borrows but does not repay? He is not thinking of the possible consequences. First of all, if he's ever going to need to borrow again, if people know that he doesn't repay. So, okay. Said Rabbi Elazar, an evil heart. Yochanan says to them, I prefer again the word of Elazar, the son of Arach, to yours, for his words include all of yours. Anybody want to agree, disagree with these traits? Is there something you feel is missing? Now, I need to say this also. You know, the first class, we talked about certain qualities of students, but that didn't mean that those are the only qualities or the ways that a teacher should try to get to a student. And obviously, this list also isn't comprehensive. It says something about Yochanan and his concerns. Tzipora?
Yeah, I was just thinking that this borrowing and not repaying is not just money. It's
Yes.
taking the essence from somebody. It's a deeper taking and borrowing and not replacing than a dish, money, you know, whatever. It's
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's a type of disrespect. I mean, it's even deeper. It's not treating the other person as an equal. If you treat them as an equal, or you know, then he's important enough that you've got to respect what you've taken and find some way to return. If not that, something of equal significance.
Yeah. So it's not something as simple as, I'm not paying him back the actual.
Exactly. It's much
Yeah.
more complicated.
You know, where do you come to treat me like that? Okay, let's look at our last text. And it's an interesting theory of pedagogy here with the Rabbi Chia. And he reminds me of Elazar ben Arach. They share something in common before we read what he says here. Elazar ben Arach, for a time, left Yavna, the academy. He felt, even though Yavna was meant to be quieter than Yerushalayim, he felt that it would be even quieter to be on his own. And so he left. But he was convinced that some of his colleagues and students would come to him. And he was disappointed when they didn't. And so when he wanted to go back, his wife, though, said, no, it's not for you to go back to them. They should be coming to you. But they didn't. And he realized that he was losing out by being on his own. That's not the way we study Torah. You study Torah in the way we are now and in other ways, not by yourself. And Rabbi Chia says the following. I made sure that Torah would not be forgotten by Jews. First, I planted flax. I then used the flax to make nets with which I trapped deer. The meat of these animals I gave away to feed orphans, and from their skins I made parchments. I then proceeded to a community where there was no one available to teach children Torah. On 5 parchments, I wrote the 5 chumashim of the Torah, which I taught from and presented to 5 of the children. 5 is the lucky number tonight. I also taught each of 6 children one of the 6 orders of the Mishnah. Then I instructed each one of them to teach the others what I had taught him until I would return to check on their progress. In this way, I made sure that Torah would never be forgotten. Now, what are all these actions that Chia took? Why didn't he just go to Israel's and buy chumashim for the kids? Does Israel's even exist anymore? I don't know. Israel's bookstore I'm talking about. Okay, why did he take all these steps to create the chumashim? That's the first question.
He builds on, on each thing, and at each step he has a vision for the future, where he takes the material that he has at the moment, and then he expands and sees a future with it. And so he's being creative, but he's using what he has from the past.
Yefeh, nice. Anybody else?
There's a nice connection between teaching and learning. And if somebody is teaching, they're also learning, and it's a domino effect.
Okay. And you see the effort that he puts into it, starting from scratch and creating the learning materials.
It's a process. It's a process. And he really focuses on that process, which gives it so much more significance. There's a huge difference about being handled. All right, they didn't have books the way we have today, but just the analogy about having the book and sitting there and watching someone make the paper and then get the ink and do the inscribing and so on. And it makes it so much more valued and holy.
Yeah, I agree. And what, according to Rabbi Chia, is the highest level of Torah development? Well, it's reached when it is shared. And we also know that when you have to teach something, that's when you really learn something yourself. Okay, I just want to take us back to the very beginning, to these 2 pictures. Anybody know what these are photographs of?
Oops.
Looks like
Anybody?
in the old city. The second one looks like
Looks
where,
like Ricardo.
Looks
Yeah.
like
Ricardo.
Ricardo.
yeah.
Okay, so this is the ancient Roman cardo. I'm pointing my finger as if you can see the remains. And here is that same cardo. And as we're in these 3 weeks toward Tisha B'Av, it's hard not to think of the fact that what remains of the Roman conquest is the picture on the right, a popular tourist stop, while we Jews have defeated their attempt to destroy us, and we are alive and well in the city of Yerushalayim. Okay. I'm not going to be seeing you for a few weeks. We take a break, but remember what we said last week about making sure Aset Toratcha Keva, that you have your appointed time for studying Torah, even if it's a few minutes. Okay, so be sure to continue that. As I know, most of you, this is not your only time of doing this. Okay, so I want to wish everybody well. And I hope it gets, sorry? And I hope the people in BC survive. And we also, our thoughts are, of course, with the people of Miami. I don't know about you, but on today's news, the Israeli delegation that's there said they've had these experiences and they've gone off to places with similar.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that they say it's very minor, but that there's still a little hope, even though it's 6 days. And what they've been doing, they have been talking with family members, trying to find out where did each of them sleep. Did they sleep in their bedrooms? Or do you know that your father maybe usually slept on a couch in the living room? Because they're paying attention to these kinds of details.
Amazing.
God bless them and be well.
When are you back?
To
When-
Bracha.
Healthy and safe.
I think it's
The 21st.
21st
Yeah.
of
Thank
July.
you.
Okay.
Bracha, as
Thanks,
always, it
Bracha.
was wonderful. You are a great teacher.
Enjoy your break.
You don't know what I'm doing with that break.
Whatever it is,
Did you get
enjoy.
reservations? You were
Okay.
having trouble getting reservations. Did you get some?
No, that's for another time. Well, we did, but we're not sure. We're playing it by ear. You can cancel, so we did. Okay.
Healthy and safe. Yes,
Keep
Nicole.
well.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
They
Bye.
said-
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Be well.
Thank you.
Bye, Bracha.